I have always loved the world of stories. Ever since I was a kid on a ranch here in Colorado, growing up, I loved campfire tales. I loved stories so much I even made up my own little magazine when I was in 5th and 6th grade. Almost got me expelled, I'm afraid, when I did a little expose about the secret truth of what went on inside the teacher's lounge. Some people didn't like that, but it was fun, and that was, in a way, my first introduction to how much the passion you feel for a story can actually come through to readers. I always loved writing. I even wrote my first novel when I was, after college, I got a little scholarship to study at Oxford, England. I wrote a novel when I traveled. I started it on the Trans-Siberian Railway and I finished it on the Serengeti. And I thought it was pretty good. But when I got back to Oxford, I sent it off to publishers and it had a fabulous reception. It got rejected by 32 separate publishers. After 7 years of still brooding over those rejection letters, I stayed up all night one night talking with my wife and made a decision and walked in the next day and had the great fun of shocking all my partners and telling them I was going to resign as president of this deal just when things were starting to look good in the company, and move back to Colorado and see if I could write a book or two. One of my partners came up to me, sheet white, he was so upset, and he pulled out of his pocket a beat-up old business card and said, "Tom, this is my therapist. You really got to call this guy." No kidding. So anyway, that's where they thought I was. But I knew I really had to try. And the truth is that people ask me all the time, wasn't it scary to change your job and all that? And sure, it's always scary to change anything in life. But that wasn't nearly as scary to me as the idea of becoming an old man and being in my 80s or 90s somewhere on my front porch and having been, a reasonably successful whatever, but never have really honestly tried to be what was really in my heart. To have let those 32 rejection letters defeat me. Every good piece of fiction, and in particular every good fantasy, must feel true. It first of all has to enliven all 5 of the senses. You have to really feel like you are there. When young Merlin washes ashore on the first page of the Lost Years of Merlin, you should hear the seagulls screeching. You should taste the sand on your tongue just like he does. You may feel that ocean current trying to drag you under the waves and drown you. Right now I'm finishing up my trilogy about a quirky little fellow named Basil, who starts out the smallest, most ignoble, ignored creature, frustrated, chased, abused, and ultimately becomes the one creature who might save the great wizard Merlin's life, and ultimately becomes the greatest dragon of all times. Basil becomes Basil-Garad. And what I'm working on now is book 3 of the trilogy. So that will complete, in fact, a 12-book cycle of all the Merlin books, which is to say that I never quite understood how far this story boat would sail when I was first crafting it up in the attic of my farmhouse outside of Boulder. But it's gone farther than I ever would have thought. And right now, when I get letters now from people in 12 languages who've been reading the Merlin books, for example, it's a very humbling thing, and I realize, it's such a blessing to be part of this world of story, because stories really do leap over all the walls, all the boundaries that we human beings are so good at creating between ourselves to divide ourselves. They connect people at a fundamental level.